Welcome back, attractive and well-educated watchers, to another episode of Could They Survive Warhammer 40k. Last time we toyed around with the idea of the Goa'uld from Stargate and considered how they might not even have a chance to avoid getting overtaken by chaos, get nuked out of existence by the Ecclesiarchy, or even potentially used as living STCs by the Mechanicus. This time promises to be our favorite episode of Could They Survive 40k yet. Possibly ever. You see, we're a big Kaiju fan. We love Kaiju. New Godzilla, Old Godzilla, Rodan, King Ghidorah, King Kong, Gamera, the Kaiju from Pacific Rim, the Journey to the West, and even the Zilla Beast from the Star Wars Clone Wars. Yes, Journey to the West has Kaiju fight scenes. All of them. All of them. We fucking love giant monsters beating each other up, causing hilarious amounts of collateral damage, being literal forces of nature that you can only get away from or watch on in stunned silence as their mere passing destroys everything that you know and love. Stories of giant monsters have been popular in all sorts of cultures since time immemorial, but Kaiju are different. Kaiju represent something. Something deep within our hearts and minds. Something that yearns to be given physical form. They can represent the consequences of nuclear annihilation. They can represent a lost protector, alone in the world, and without purpose, save to maintain their own land. They can represent the grandiose fighting human spirit, or the concept of nature at its most primordial, striking out against those who sought to harm and control it. One thing we don't think about when we consider Kaiju is that they might just represent the power of love, of communal belonging, generosity, and passionate affection. We don't generally think of Kaiju as representing a timeless and heartfelt bond between man and beast. The exception is one of our personal favorite Kaiju to ever be conceptualized. Clifford the Big Red Dog! Ahoo! And yes, before you try running your fingers down in the comments section going all keyboard warrior on us, Clifford is a Kaiju. And we're gonna prove it with facts and logic! You see, we have personally watched every single one of the classic Clifford episodes, and we figured it out pretty keenly. And by the end of this breakdown, you'll accept the science. First and foremost, a quick disclaimer. Clifford's story is well covered throughout his canon, from his puppy days as the runt of his litter, to his time on Birdwell Island in the Atlantic Ocean alongside his fellow experimental mutant dog friends. However, the actual details of his story are filtered through the lens of a children's franchise. In reality, most of Clifford the Big Red Dog's adventures would be legally unfeasible without some sort of government intervention, and, in being a huge fan of the series since we were a kid, we have developed a personal headcanon on the inner workings of Clifford's universe and story, most specifically revolving around the Howards traveling to a tiny island with less than 1,000 people, and only one way on or off being because the US military wanted to keep Clifford there in secret just in case Godzilla attacked or some shit. We will not be airing from this headcanon, and will be using this video as our personal showcase for why we think Clifford lives the way he does, and why the US government hasn't taken him in for dissection. For the sake of this video, we'll also assume that Clifford originates from the Monsterverse or something very similar to it. That being said, even if you throw the entire Monsterverse out the window, our headcanon still applies, because the statistics are still hard set. See it as you will, but long story short, you're going to be getting our version of Clifford, because it's reasonable to assume that there are some more, legal adult reasons why a 180-foot tall size-changing breath weapon using human intellect possessing canine might not be allowed to stay within the limits of New York City, as shown within the original children's books. So without further ado, let's get to talking about Clifford the Big Red Kaiju. Adopted as a puppy by a little girl named Emily Elizabeth, Clifford started off as a very not-so-big dog. In fact, he was the runt of his litter, expected not to survive. Or at least to always stay small. However, upon making a bond with Emily Elizabeth, Clifford grew attached to her, and Emily Elizabeth's pure, innocent love and care brought him back to health and helped him grow big and strong. So big and strong, in fact, that he eventually grew too big to fit in their home, an old brownstone in New York City. Naturally, as an over 10-foot tall canine cannot fit well in a place like New York City, especially not with all those superheroes running around, the Howard family had to move out to a little island in the Atlantic known as Birdwell Island. This island is well known for being out in the middle of nowhere, having only one way on or off, and we believe it's established at some point that it has a small military base on it. We wonder why. On this island, Clifford made friends with other dogs that are equally freakish, though not equally large, and had awesome times with his owner, Emily Elizabeth. The series has, at this point, ended, so Clifford's entire canon is more or less established. And we seriously recommend you go check out the series if you like metafictional analysis like we do, because Clifford rather casually does some things on camera that would make many superheroes blush with inadequacy. If nothing else, if you have kids, it's a great show to set up for them. Talking about his powers, let's first and foremost get to his size. Clifford often changes size wildly from episode to episode or even moment to moment within the same scene. For the sake of this scenario, we'll assume that this is part of Clifford's power base and not a simple stylistic goof. The reason for this is because Clifford is regularly seen standing up next to buildings that are explicitly over 100 feet tall, whilst also regularly giving Emily Elizabeth rides on his back or standing next to 20-foot-tall food shacks. Since both of these events are canon, it can only be assumed that Clifford is able to shrink his body down to his most commonly viewed height of around 25 feet at the shoulder, or around 7.62 meters. For those who think that this isn't that big of a dog, remember that he is easily over 2 stories tall, assuming that an average of 10-foot floor heights. If you were in school and your class was on the 3rd floor of the building, Clifford, at his minimum size, would be able to easily stare into the classroom window and watch you take your math test. But that is not Clifford's maximum size. It is only the smallest possible size that we see him getting to. His largest size can be seen on screen during the events of Season 1, Episode 2, Fairy Tale. In this episode, alongside other amazing feats of power, Clifford is shown walking up to the lighthouse of the island and taking off its top before swimming out into the ocean to guide a ship to dock. The lighthouse's appearance is surprisingly variable in the series, but in many still cover images it bears striking resemblance to the Fire Island light in New York, and even in the episode in question, it looks remarkably like the Nassau Island light. Understanding that this is an Atlantic island with an eastward-facing lighthouse coastline, we can intuit that this is a major landfall lighthouse, which would contain a hyper-radial Fresnel lens, a nearly 10-ton mast that's also supported by the housing and lamp portions of the lighthouse, easily making this feat probably something along the lines of 20 to 30 tons. And Clifford very, very easily lifts up this in his teeth and swims it out to sea. When he walks up to the lighthouse, he stands at height with it. When we look at major landfall lighthouses on the East Coast, the tallest 10 list their heights from 160 to 210 feet tall, so we can safely assume that Clifford is probably something along the lines of 180 feet tall, possibly even at the shoulder. And we hear some of you cry out there that King Kong and Godzilla are reaching up to 300 feet tall in the most recent videos. How can Clifford match that, you ask? Well, unlike Kong and Godzilla, Clifford is a proper quadruped. He, like any canine, is much longer than he is tall. If he were to stand up on his haunches, he'd easily be able to look Godzilla in the eyes and then lick his face. And ask yourself this: can you take on a dog that stands belly button height at the shoulder? That's the sort of comparison Clifford's working with when we think about the upright kaiju we're so used to seeing on the big screen. Clifford is absolutely the same sort of size as the two big names that we like to talk about, and he can lift over 20 tons out of place and carry it away with casual ease just with his mouth. But size alone does not make a kaiju, we hear you say. To be in the kaiju club, you gotta do kaiju things! Godzilla has atomic breath. King Kong has giant radiation-absorbing weapons. Gamera manipulates fire and has magic chest lasers. And we just cannot wait until they actually use the mammoth kaiju they've been teasing at for 3 movies now? And he'll have a water jet from his trunk or something, we bet. Worry not! Clifford has breath weapons and special abilities covered. You see, Clifford is an airbender. We only wish that we could say we're fucking with you here. Clifford has shown in over half of his episodes that he has considerable air manipulation abilities. He can produce wind from every part of his body. In Season 2, Episode 5, Everyone Loves Clifford, Clifford is able to produce winds just by casually kicking his feet that are so propulsive that they flap the neighbors around like flags while those same neighbors are grabbing onto vertical surfaces to avoid being flown away. Considering the rather rotund nature of the Bleakmans, it's fair to say that the big red dog was producing no less than 200-mile-an-hour winds in this incident, perhaps as high as 300. tornado speeds of wind here just by kicking his feet during a good scratching. In Season 1, Episode 36, Fair Weather Friends, Clifford is seen to use his wind manipulation via a blow from his mouth to visibly agitate a heavy storm cloud. Storm clouds, you see, are heavy. Indeed, a dark water-laden storm cloud like the one we see in this very episode is very heavy, about 1 billion pounds. While Clifford didn't push this cloud away completely, he did do something, showing visible movement in the layers as Clifford pushed part of it away as he blew with all his might. If we assume that Clifford was imparting even 1% of the cloud's weight in this scene in order to visibly move and push it even just a bit, as is usually required from some kind of pushing force total, we can calculate this feat at something along the lines of 3 billion newtons, or just over the force of a 7-megaton nuclear bomb, with a 2-second windup. His air manipulation is not limited to the extremely powerful, however. Quite the contrary. Clifford, you see, is much more often shown to use his air manipulation for lesser feats, sometimes so casual as to be accidental. One particularly good feat is shown in Season 2 during the pre-credits lesson at the end of the episode. Clifford, being helpful, blows a pile of autumn leaves into the air in a great spiral and then makes them come down in a single neat column to land entirely in an open trash can. And that, of course, is not the only thing. Clifford regularly uses his air manipulation on screen to do nearly anything he wants. This sort of shit is the kind of thing we only see from the world of Avatar. Pushing and pulling things, blowing leaves into piles, blowing piles of leaves into trash bins, blowing sailboats around on the water, sucking faraway objects towards him, producing a breeze for his fellows by wagging his tail. The list just goes on and on. There are few episodes where Clifford's ability to produce and control air are not featured, at least in passing. And it isn't limited to air. He gets scarier. In Season 1, Episode 12, Welcome to Birdwell Island, Clifford and friends come across a small forest fire. Clifford, in this scene, slurps up a pond. A pond that is about as big as he is. This entire pond goes into just his mouth, which he then disgorges onto the nearby forest fire and puts it out completely and instantly. To be able to compress this sort of water, this water from a pond that was as big as him, that he puts all in just only his mouth, requires a compression rate of around 90%. To say how amazing it is that he is able to disgorge nearly 10,000 gallons of water a second in this very scene, it's also physically impossible. We've had some numbers and physics guys run through this for a while, but most of them have come to the agreement that, because of how the graph on water compression requirements seems to curve, Clifford will be turning water into never-before-discovered stages of exotic ice at room temperature before he's compressing water that much. The water becomes solid at that point. Initial numbers put us at around 1 million psi when we first threw this through our unscientific generalization, but after the numbers guys got their hands on it, they were like, nah man, that's more like 10 or even 100 million psi. This is a cosmic event. Just releasing that sort of pressure, just opening his mouth after that sort of compression, would kill everybody in that nearby area instantly. This isn't the force necessary to blow out a forest fire. This is the force necessary to blow out a forest. As if that weren't already apparent by his cloud-blowing feat. That being said, that sort of compression in this particular scene also helps add credit to the previous scaling. No matter how you slice it, we're dealing with multiple megatons, perhaps even several dozen megatons of compression and bite force in that dog's mouth alone, just by closing his mouth and pursing his lips. We could absolutely keep going on about his air manipulation feats, but these are pretty much the top things you're going to find. Everything else is parlor tricks or just stuff to emphasize just how powerful Clifford can be without trying, and we'll come to talk about that later. Suffice to say that for now, Clifford certainly ticks off the breath weapon and supernatural ability box for the Kaiju Club. Suffice to say, it's even realistic to assume that not only can he blow with 7 megatons of force, but he can probably curve that air around corners or form tornadoes, for all we know. It's amazing that he can't fly. Now we want to direct attention to the fact that Clifford is an earthquake machine. Clifford, in almost every single episode, is shown at least momentarily shaking the earth around him just by moving about. In some episodes, Clifford actually shakes the ground and makes people fall out of their chairs just by walking casually down the street with Emily Elizabeth on his back. He is so powerful that he shakes literal buildings just by bouncing about playfully. Now, as we said already, this is just a regular thing. More than his air manipulation, Clifford is followed by his earth-shaking size. So let's put Clifford's biggest feats to the test. Well, we were a bit spoiled for choice here. We believe the biggest show of his power was in Season 2, Episode 14, Vaz Goes Down the Tubes. In this episode, trying to get the attention of Emily Elizabeth's friend Vaz while he watches TV, Clifford bounces around outside of the kid's house with sufficient force to make the furniture leap off the ground and briefly shake the entire building from its foundations. Vaz ends up being thrown into the air and then back down, his television bouncing up a foot into the air. Since most earthquakes that Clifford produces seem to shake the area around him for quite some distance, as featured in multiple episodes, we can assume that he was simulating something akin to an MMI 8 earthquake. This sort of effect would require something along the lines of half a dozen megatons of force to create an actual earthquake-scale event. To back this feat up and to show that it's not a one-time thing, in Season 1, Episode 1, My Best Friend, Emily Elizabeth rolls out a big old tire that Clifford sends roughly 20 feet into the air by slamming onto the ground in front of her. Clifford was quite a bit closer to the tire, about 4 times closer than he was from the house at the time, and if we punch in some numbers, we can find out that this impact force scales somewhere similar along Season 2, Episode 4. As a bit more frosting on the cake, however, there's a much more straightforward feat to determine how strong Clifford can be at a moment's notice. In Season 2, Episode 9, Getting to Know You, Clifford casually throws an old log over the horizon in order to give himself and his dog friend T-Bone something to fetch. Just by swinging his head, assuming this is an old oak log, perhaps weighing as much as 10,000 pounds, Clifford is producing the thrust force of 24 Space Shuttle solid fuel booster rockets all at once. This is just a casual let's go fetch sort of thing here. But Vaz Goes Down the Tubes was not only the best episode to feature Clifford's raw strength. Clifford had a bit of a surprise for us in Season 2, Episode 14. In that same scene that he bounces Vaz's house up and down while trying to play, Clifford howls to get the boys' attention. This howl produces an MMI 7 earthquake that is felt over the entire town. We're comfortable rating this howl at something along the lines of 600 to 700 kilotons, with a big, fat asterisk that's going to come up later on in reference to almost everything we've said at this point. Suffice to say, it's entirely reasonable to assume that Clifford's vocal force alone can probably break the megaton scale without too much difficulty, especially given his breath weapon stats as mentioned earlier. Proportionate to his base breed, a giant red Vizsla, Clifford at his size could probably run a minimum expected speed of around 500 miles an hour. Indeed, on screen, him running past things has been shown to throw people out of their chairs or otherwise produce wind capable of bending fully grown trees nearly to the ground and causing chaos all around him. So we can assume that he's at least pushing a few hundred miles an hour at this size. However, he never at any point seems to make any sonic booms, so we can settle his speed in a relatively easygoing high subsonic. Perhaps more impressive is his swimming speed. Clifford is shown in multiple episodes being able to use both his tail and even his ears to paddle himself through the water faster than his feet would otherwise be able. How this works? We have no idea. But he has clearly done it on screen and seems to be able to reach the speed of a good speedboat. We'd probably put his fastest speed at around 85 miles an hour, allowing a girl holding on to him to barefoot water ski alongside. While we've never seen Clifford react to things like bullets, why would we? He's consistently shown himself to have good reflexes, and we can only assume that he would have considerably better reflexes than his size would otherwise permit. In a previous video, we explained that human reaction speeds are about 25 times faster than their bulk movement speeds to help reference just how fast Duncan Idaho would be able to react to incoming dangers. Clifford puts that to shame, as dogs have been shown in studies to react 3 times faster on average than humans. It would not be unreasonable to therefore assume that Clifford's reaction speed ranges in the massively hypersonic speeds as far as reactions go, perhaps as low as Mach 50. But given his other ridiculous feats in universe, we wouldn't put it past him to have the capacity to pull off relativistic reaction feats. There's just no on-screen feats to show this or imply that this is the truth. So, Mach 50 to 100 it is. But Clifford isn't all power and speed. He's also pretty smart, at least as smart as Emily Elizabeth, if perhaps less educated and well-read. Clifford has shown himself to be able to read, make advanced plans far ahead of time, strongly visualize tasks and outcomes, speak with some form of capacity similar to human language, if not admittedly in human speech itself, and perform other highly intelligent feats and tasks. Most terrifyingly, in Season 2, Episode 24, Doghouse Rock, Clifford and his military experiment dog friends put together a concert. In this episode, Clifford shows that he knows how to play real music, even on bits of garbage and buckets. His dog friends are able to also dance on their hind legs, sing, play instruments, and perform acrobatics. And the local squirrels work as stagehands. This is some Planet of the Apes shit over here. And while all the domesticated animals on the island are there, no humans seem to give a shit that the pets are making their own society. This island is a purpose-built sanctuary for military experiments. It's not just Clifford, it's all of the animals. They're all military freaks. Every part of Clifford appears to be opposable or prehensile. He's been shown lifting things and grabbing things with his tail. Multiple scenes have shown him reaching down with a paw to nimbly pick things up, including but not limited to bunches of loose objects like dog treats, and he can move his ears around to cover his eyes, swat at flies, or even paddle his entire body along at speedboat velocity through the water. Perhaps most terrifying of all, Clifford has a sort of mask-like form of emotional control, as he was shown to inspire an entire construction team to stop their work and start dancing the can-can in Season 1, Episode 16, The Ears Have It, by Sing Howl Barking. He only uses this once, so we doubt he could call upon it anywhere and at a moment's notice, but it's still important to mention it. Finally, and this is probably the worst part of actually scaling Clifford, as well as the most chilling part of putting Clifford into the Kaiju Club in the first place, we don't actually know Clifford's top strength. With the exception of his 7+ megaton breath weapon, Clifford has never been shown to strain himself. He regularly produces megaton levels of force on screen, shaking the world and blowing out forest fires like birthday candles on accident. Sometimes just walking around as a casual dog can cause tremors so intense that it throws people out of their chairs. Often, just wagging his tail against the ground can literally wiggle buildings visibly from their foundations. He can, without even trying, compress an entire pond into his mouth and casually spit it out onto a nearby forest fire as though this was something easy, despite the fact that he is potentially producing 100 million psi of force with his jaws and lips alone. He can effortlessly dig up tons upon tons of earth with his bare paws in seconds just to find a bone buried some time ago. We can't even say what his maximum power is because he's only once ever been shown to put his all into something, and that was the functional equivalent of blowing out some candles. This dog is the giant canine version of Saitama. The world is too easy for him. Therefore, for the sake of the scenario, and given Clifford's truly casual way of doing these things, we think it's as conservative as we could allow ourselves to multiply all but his breath weapon feat by 10 to account for the fact that he is assuredly holding back or simply not putting everything he's got into any of these feats. The biggest physical attack force totals and vocal force totals that he's got are all just him being a silly puppy, after all. And of course, none of this, not a little bit, begins to cover his durability. Durability, however, is pretty easy in most of these sort of scaling matters, at least in our experience. If nothing else, Clifford's durability needs to exceed his maximum damage output, or else he'd blow himself to bits the first time he howled too hard. If his durability were close to his maximum output, he would be noticeably fatigued or even hurt by his own abilities, as seen by characters like Deku from early My Hero Academia. But at no point throughout the entire canon do we see this, even during his most powerful and intentional feats, like the cloud-blowing feat. Instead, Clifford seems to have the capacity to not only do these great feats on accident, but in quick succession. so his damage output must be otherwise completely dwarfed by his durability. For example, it's healthy to say that if Clifford's rocking out with something like a 60 or 70 megatons for his physical strength feat, as shown in Vaz Goes Down the Tubes and then multiplied by his casual strength modifier as stated above, we can assume that he has a minimum durability of around 100 megatons, considering that he never even gets remotely hurt or winded, and Clifford has run into things at full speed before and been just fine. Suffice to say that we're dealing with a doggo here that even the Tsar Bomba at its highest ordnance couldn't take out with a single blast. Not really. It would probably hurt Clifford, but something tells us that it just wouldn't be enough. Clifford is so casually durable about his feats that we can't, for the life of us, figure out how to lower his durability here. But Clifford is not alone. Clifford and Emily Elizabeth work as a team, their bond so close that Emily Elizabeth shows considerable mental stress if she's separated from her beloved companion for more than even a day at school. And while only 8 years old, Emily Elizabeth has shown that she is no slouch in the scaling department. While certainly not nearly as commonly needing calculations as Clifford, Emily Elizabeth has an impressive array of skills and abilities that she'll be able to fall back on for this video. First and foremost, Emily Elizabeth is an extremely bookish little girl, having an incredibly high reading speed and comprehension level, and possessing an advanced grasp of her language. A good speaker capable of utilizing wit and tact in tough situations to her advantage, Emily Elizabeth has a remarkably good capacity to tell right from wrong, a firm moral compass that even deception and temptation has failed to shake her from on screen. She's a good planner, has a lot of self-control, and has shown herself to be good at delegation and administrative tasks, even with regards to swaying the hearts and minds of those older and more experienced than she is. It is assumed that she's pretty crafty as well, having gone camping and done outdoorsy things with her family for much of her life, at least from time to time. So far as we've seen, Emily Elizabeth has very clearly above average dexterity for a human, able to perform casual front flips and tricks on rollerblades and barefoot. Furthermore, while it was only in passing, she does have a basic formal education in the earliest stages of karate. While her reaction speeds have been shown to be quite high, there's nothing implying that she might have any sort of super speed or bullet time feats. But okay, we hear you cry, none of this is particularly impressive compared to a literal fucking kaiju, especially not in the context of the grim darkness of the 41st millennium. What makes Emily Elizabeth so special that she deserves her own breakdown space? Well, you see, we're glad you ask, because in Season 1, Episode 27, New Dog in Town, Emily Elizabeth on the beach gets her thumb snapped straight across by a crab and barely even seems to notice before suddenly realizing that she's got something latched onto her. She half-heartedly waves it around a bit, and after, just lets it go. She just smiles and gets over it. Her hand is shown to be mark-free, as though she hadn't even been pinched. Anyone out there knows that crab snaps are no fucking joke. If we take this particular crab snap, we can safely and conservatively scale the damage to something like 3.5 to 5.6 megatons of TNT. Okay, no, that's a joke, guys. That's a joke. It's just a joke, guys. It's a joke. Okay, maybe like half a joke, because crab claws are still fucking horrendous. No, let's get to some real shit. To loom on durability, it's not that hard. We actually have to give Emily Elizabeth fairly hilarious scaling here, because at least as far as we know, this 8-year-old girl must scale to Clifford. Not because we're some optimistic know-nothing, for the record, but because Emily Elizabeth is always around Clifford's strongest feats. Clifford howls hard enough to cause an MMI 7 earthquake shaking the entire community. Emily Elizabeth is fine. Clifford slamming into the ground with enough force to throw an industrial tractor tire 20 feet into the air. Emily Elizabeth didn't even move in that scene. The tire flew 20 feet into the air, but Emily Elizabeth, who had been touching the tire in that moment, barely even bounced. Clifford smashing down next to her with the force of a fucking hydrogen bomb, without even trying, and she doesn't even move. Clifford, right next to her, compressing water into exotic solids only to create a 7 megaton blast wave to put out this forest fire? Emily Elizabeth is completely fine, doesn't even notice a 500,000 PSI overpressure that would otherwise tear apart the body, mind, and soul of any lesser entities. Not only does she withstand these feats, she normally does so while touching Clifford. riding on his back, petting him, hanging off of his tail as he runs around with her trailing in the wind behind him. This is no joke. Emily Elizabeth's durability just flat scales to the big red dog because it couldn't be any other way. This is a monster that could level cities with a bark if he wanted to. The fact that this 8-year-old girl has survived the last 2 years with this literal kaiju means that she must have taken a howl or a stomp or a bark or a tackle or a breath weapon at some point, and she's not only lived to tell the tale but otherwise ended up completely tanking it and not even noticing it. This girl no-sells megaton impacts. Remember that Clifford regularly performs these sorts of feats also on accident. In his own words and admission, there's zero possibility that Emily Elizabeth hasn't gotten the lethal scale end of this playfulness while he's been growing up. And while her durability can casually ignore Tsar Bomba levels of punishment, Emily Elizabeth is also much stronger than any 8-year-old in the 40k universe will have to offer. In Season 1, Episode 1, My Best Friend, Emily Elizabeth rolls out a gigantic tractor tire for Clifford to play with. We've mentioned this scene in reference in Clifford's potential physical damage output and Emily Elizabeth's durability, both scaling pretty clearly to each other in this scene specifically. However, what we didn't cover is the sort of ripped that this little girl must be. If we'll assume this is a standard industrial tractor tire, it probably weighs something along the lines of 600 pounds. Emily Elizabeth, assuming she's the average 8-year-old girl, probably weighs something around 60 pounds and is perhaps 50 inches tall. This means that in this scene, Emily Elizabeth is casually moving around an object 10 times her weight. Or maybe even more, we don't know. Since she can finagle it around without difficulty at all, we can assume that Emily Elizabeth is probably even stronger than this, but suffice to say she can easily handle and lift something along the lines of 10 times her own mass. Emily Elizabeth's casual everyday strength, bare minimum, therefore directly scales to an adult silverback gorilla, or more appropriately for the scenario, an average space marine. That's right. Proportionate to her body size, Emily Elizabeth is as strong as a naked space marine. And of course, this is very casual. As with previous Clifford stats, we can probably put that potential into the multiplier, not saying that Emily Elizabeth would be able to lift 3 tons by herself, but she can certainly handle over 1/4 of a ton with casual ease, so we can safely assume that she can lift more than any adult human being, and certainly fold one like a lawn chair if she so desired. If given time and experience, Emily Elizabeth could be quite a capable combatant. With that all taken care of, we'll go into the scenarios. While most scenarios start pretty hard set in the other videos, we're going to be a bit more flexible and ridiculous with this particular video due to the more lighthearted nature of our subjects. Things here will be a bit sillier than usual, at least after the worst case scenario. While we've been going on about the durability and capability of both the big red dog and his favorite human, the fact of the matter is that Emily Elizabeth is still an 8-year-old girl from New England, mostly raised in New York City before being moved to an idyllic Martha's Vineyard-inspired Atlantic island, and Clifford is still a 2-year-old dog. We have no way to tell how long they will live thanks to their inborn powers, but they still have to eat and live and care for themselves. And their total collective life experience and practical skills are minimal, regardless of how intellectually bound either one of them might be in canon. Emily Elizabeth knows how to camp, she probably even knows how to make a fire or can figure it out well enough in time, but she can't take care of herself. Not really. She might have a perfect sense of moral clarity, always able to make the ethically correct decision, but she can't do anything more than survive if left truly alone on one of the many inhospitable and uninhabited worlds of the 40k universe. Maiden worlds exist that have been long abandoned by the Eldar for millions of years. Utopic wilderness as far as the eye can see, with absolutely nobody to mar the landscape with so much as a wall or roof to be seen across the entire planet. If they landed in one of these long abandoned planets and found themselves unable to get off, both Emily Elizabeth and Clifford would certainly survive, but that's it. Assuming that Clifford has some sort of longevity about him, they'd be the only company the other has for decades to come. Life will be long and difficult. In a constant state of primitive naturalism, with the highest of modern pleasures that they can maintain being simple, small-scale farming endeavors and pottery within which to store food. Living in New York with her runty puppy will become a distant memory, then fade away entirely before long. The only connection to sanity she'd have, the only person to talk to, would be her pet Kaiju. How, we wonder, could a child's mind withstand such an isolating experience? Emily Elizabeth, after all, has shown herself to suffer at least moderate emotional distress when separated from a living community, or even just from her dog for not terribly long. Just a day or two. How could even the best of dogs help keep that poor girl together? He can try his very best to connect with her, but there's only so much a canine can do. The tragedy of that life, while not lethal, is perhaps even worse. Over the years, she would mature and bumble through the rough and tumble lifestyle of her isolation. Clifford and Emily Elizabeth would hunt as needed, maintain simple gardens, and probably construct a simple home as best as they could out of trees and animal skins. Life would be hard, lonely, and without hope. Every day, she would explore as far as she could with this big red dog, before returning to continue the chores, the hunting, the living day to day. As time goes by, the two might fall out with each other for days at a time before coming back together, the only reminders of a life long lost, whether those reminders be good or bad. At the end of it all, however, Emily Elizabeth and her best friend will be all the other has on this long-forgotten planet. Other life will become alien to them, such that they may even forget what they came from, who they are. Emily Elizabeth might even come to forget her own name, so seldom does she find a reason to use it. And eventually, taken by age, the two will die together on this lost world, having only the company of each other as consolation after a long and miserable life in a state of nature, lost and alone. This is the saddest scenario we think we've ever done. Possibly that we will ever do. It is a reminder that the mind of a child is a delicate, innocent thing, and that these crazy metafictional analyses videos might be fun, but they ask a deeper question. What the fuck are we doing? Putting these beautiful characters built around love and caring generosity, and the desire to fill their world with happiness and joy into a grimdark future wherein there is only war. Making them fight for their lives in a world of isolation so dark and foreboding that it makes us lose sleep at night. You voted for this. You brought this on yourselves. Torturing a little girl and her only begotten companion not to conventional, but self-destruction on the deepest level on some long-forgotten paradise world where society is but a long-forgotten dream that she sometimes has when she wakes up at the first light and holds herself close to the only friend she's known since she was but a child, the only entity in this entire universe that knows her voice. Okay, but let's get back to the fun stuff, because we're not going to let this video continue on a downer, even if we started with it in the downiest downers we think could ever be made in this sort of video. Let's turn this shit around by talking about the actually good-aligned faction in the 40k universe, the Farsight Enclaves. These guys are actually good. Not just compared to everyone else in the universe, but actually canonically good guys with good intentions for all. When they talk about the greater good, they actually mean the greater good. They are the Tau that aren't absolutely fucking slimy about their agendas. No brainwashing, no pheromone manipulation, no forced sterilization, no private evil overlords, just kick-ass good guys in giant robots trying to do right by their people, knowing how to say please and thank you, and having a stern but fair culture behind them. Sure, they still have to fight and have some gruff attitudes mixed in there, but Clifford and Emily Elizabeth are not only not judgmental, but can also tell if people are good deep down inside, even if they are rough on the outside, as shown by Mr. Bleakman. The Farsight Enclaves also wouldn't absolutely screw them over. Such a fair and innocent soul and her companion would be welcomed into the Farsight Enclaves with open arms. As the girl and her dog grow up, they would be sure to take all the data possible and help the duo become responsible and capable members of Enclave society. Undoubtedly, Emily Elizabeth would eventually work her way into the Watercast, as the Enclaves do still have those, becoming an excellent diplomat and peacemaker in nearby planets, and helping to expand their influence to many worlds in just a few short decades. With such keen social skills, such an impressive companion, and such good diplomatic teachers, Emily Elizabeth would work her way up the ranks in no time at all, her faithful friend at her side every step of the way, to act as a form of, forceful negotiations in the event of less amicable diplomatic relations. Other factions would quickly come to join, and all of the best technology would be spent to ensure her survival and the further study and reproduction of the big red dog. With their dedication and probably some extremely dangerous procurement missions to Imperial space to get tons of dogs, breeding programs and special trials would begin under Emily Elizabeth's careful watch. Certainly, with time and patience, something alike to the original circumstances of Clifford's growth would be achieved. One Clifford is enough to bring many planets away from the dark and dangerous powers simply by having a good diplomatic entity by his side. With many more, the Enclaves could sweep across the galaxy with a giant red wave of peace and restoration of freedom for the real greater good. Perhaps it would take centuries, maybe even 1,000 years, but eventually they would crack the code and learn what truly makes a big red dog. And once that happens, Oshova would be certain to take advantage of the circumstances and return to the Tau Empire with the capacity to turn the tide against his former overlords and liberate his people once and for all. From there, draw your own conclusions. In the entirety of the 40K galaxy, there are few living entities quite as potentially destructive as the combination of Clifford the Red Dog and Emily Elizabeth. But they are still young. Despite the fact that both of them have strong moral compasses and capable understanding of social nuance and deception, they are both fairly inexperienced in how long-term interactions really go, simply lacking life experience. On the other end of the spectrum, self-interested inquisitors that have spent literal centuries mastering the art of social combat and could pass themselves off as trustworthy figures pervade the galaxy, always on the lookout for, say, a superpowered little girl and a big red dog capable of blowing out cities like candles. One of the inquisitors that might be in a capable position to convince the young Emily Elizabeth that she is a friend is Inquisitor Amberly Vale. This isn't to say that Amberly Vale is, a good person, but she's rather generously aligned away from the most horrific experiences of the Warhammer 40k universe all the same. She's repeatedly shown more tact and reason than belligerence and genocidal mania, erring on the side of caution and the interests of the greatest number, rather than run around on wild heretical goose chases that get billions killed in the process. Perhaps even more advantageously, she's inclined to make friends and allies wherever possible, and making friends with Emily Elizabeth and Clifford the Big Red Dog is eminently possible. Unable to make their way in this galaxy where there is only war, the duo will almost certainly stick out at first, attracting the attention of Amberly Vale, and convincing the Inquisitor that this big red dog and his nearly indestructible owner is worth talking to. With a combination of diplomatic skill, legitimate shows of concern for the Imperium, and a calm disposition that clouds her most malicious intentions, Amberly could absolutely convince the 8-year-old girl that she is a safe person to stick with in this universe where there is only war and conflict. She'll agree to help the two find their parents, find their home again. Of course, this will never happen, but by the time the two would have the knowledge of this universe to consider that, they'll have learned enough to want to stay by the Inquisitor's side. At every stage of Emily Elizabeth's growth, the Inquisitor will treat her only the best, creating a miraculously woven image of the rest of the universe to convince the girl that fighting is a necessary evil, that her love and caring compassion are still important, but ultimately have to be reserved for those that she knows that she can trust. And there are so few in this universe to trust. Only the Emperor and his finest can be trusted. To facilitate this, Amberly will probably end up dropping little Emily Elizabeth and her big red dog into the arms of one Commissar Caiaphas Cain, hero of the Imperium. Cain, after all, has always been a careful and easygoing sort of individual, and doesn't overreact when faced with things that other commissars would kill someone over, like insubordination or internal scuffles between folks under his command. As a matter of fact, he seems to have a bit of a problem with people under his purview getting pregnant and having lovers' spats rather than fights and mutinies. All in all, probably one of the better people to help raise Emily Elizabeth and her big red dog, especially considering that there are all too many opportunities around Caiaphas Cain for Clifford to show how useful he is. Perhaps even more useful for the hero of the Imperium, Clifford and Emily Elizabeth represent safety and authority. Tyranids, orcs, even Necrons don't stand a chance against a Kaiju, and that Kaiju loves the Commissar and sees him as a friend. There is no better place for Caiaphas Cain than with Clifford the Big Red Dog. Just ask him, he'll tell you all about it. And knowing her already extant abilities, the Inquisition would put a lot into the training and education of the duo. Clifford, by himself, is a great boon to the Inquisition, but Emily Elizabeth has many good abilities that lend themselves well to being an Inquisitor. She is a good judge of character, can easily tell fact from lie, is fast on her feet, quick of mind, stronger than a Space Marine, powerfully psychic, more on that later, and nearly indestructible. With a few decades of training, she'll be ready to take on the mantle all by herself, backed by the reputation of having been apprenticed to Inquisitor Amberly Vale, the social lineage of being raised in part by the hero of the Imperium, and the physical intimidation of the Big Red Dog himself. With her near-infinite resources and inclination to figure things out personally and use what she can, Amberly Vale would probably even find out exactly what made Clifford so big in the first place, that being what we can only imagine is Emily Elizabeth's immense psychic power. And from there, she could potentially reproduce the process and make more Cliffords, utilizing psychic children that could be swept away from the horrors of the universe to channel their love and compassion into sweet, runty puppies turned Kaiju to fight back the enemy. But let's talk a bit more about the psychic power of Emily Elizabeth. After a long time of research, we've come to the distinct conclusion that Clifford's condition is not a genetic one, as no other member of his family has exhibited such size or abilities. It is very potentially a grand embellishment of the runt effect, wherein the runt of the litter, if they survive, tends to become much larger and stronger than their siblings. However, we're not exactly sold on that one. What's far more likely is that Emily Elizabeth is a psyker. And not just any psyker. One of the most powerful psykers to ever exist. You see, the canon is explicitly clear that it was Emily Elizabeth's love and care that made Clifford grow so big and strong. Her emotions came out in her treatment of Clifford and inspired him, the runt of the litter no larger than half the size of his siblings, to become a 180-foot-tall size-changing airbending kaiju. When taken in the context of the 40k universe, that means she's a fucking psyker. It's entirely possible that this is also one of the reasons that Emily Elizabeth is so strong and durable. She's unconsciously using psychic power to remain functionally invulnerable, and she never stops. She simply doesn't have an off switch. The sort of constant psychic power that would burn out a black ship and leave the Sisters of Silence scrambling to figure out what to do. Suffice to say, this sort of psychic power not only matches, but outright surpasses the power of the God Emperor of Mankind during the Horus Heresy, as we're relatively certain the Emperor never tanked a full-force Tsar Bomba and survived. Logically, if it's Emily Elizabeth that has created Clifford with her psychic power, she's able to make living entities manifest an amazing array of abilities that we simply haven't seen from any psykers in the 40k galaxy before. She just doesn't know it yet. And this grand psychic presence would, whether she likes it or not, reveal her to the most powerful psychic individuals in the known universe. Indeed, while we don't really have to worry about any chaos shenanigans, due to her inherent ability to tell right from wrong, it would be truly impossible for her to stay hidden long without the help of those who knew what they were doing. And there are few that know what they're doing in the 40k universe more than Eldrod Ultron. An Eldar Farseer able to detect the smallest change in the timeline without a thought, able to intuit the correct decision centuries ahead of time, one of the most powerful psychers in the 40k canon. It would occur to him right off the bat that this hideously powerful entity had appeared in his universe and now, struggling along, knows not what to do. Time would fall into flux the moment she entered the galaxy, setting off every prophecy alarm that ever was and making some new ones just for good measure. So powerful is she that potentially all of the universe could be saved if only her abilities could be honed. He would reach out to her telepathically for a time, and then come to her aid to spirit her away to a craft world where she could be safe. And there, he could teach her how to really use her power. While she would not care for the way that the Eldar look down on humanity, Eldrad is one of the less racist of the Eldari, and he understands that there is more at stake than space elf pride, encouraging her to ignore the others and focus on her studies. He would dedicate all of his time to raising this little human girl into the most effective psyker the 40k universe has ever seen, egging her on throughout the duration with stories of the past and by gently humoring her quaint ideas of togetherness and unity. If all goes as planned, after all, that which stands in the way of her goals will be destroyed anyway. Think about an individual that can shrug off 100 megatons without thinking about it. Think about an entity whose power rivals the Emperor himself, but whose conscience will never allow her to embrace the xenophobia and genocidal megalomania that drove the god of man to his crusades. Think of a power that can, with training and dedication, create 100 or 1,000 big red dogs. Or perhaps merely pour her power into the pre-existing one, making him infinitely powerful in any field within which he's dropped. A power that could rival the Chaos Gods, and potentially bring calm to the Sea of Souls once again, as it was before the age of the War in Heaven. Just as powerful as the Emperor, or perhaps even more so, Emily Elizabeth would have a hard upbringing, but one where she understands her purpose, and wields great power to make things right as she sees fit. Utilizing her amazing psychic potency, Emily Elizabeth will eventually grow beyond Eldrad's tutelage and carry out a vicious battle against the ruinous powers. Perhaps her and Clifford's power will be insufficient to entirely destroy the Chaos Gods, but in time, the duo will grow to eclipse them and become a new driving force for order and peace in the 40k universe that simply cannot be resisted. In thousands, or perhaps even tens of thousands of years, using her amazing psychic power and fantastical technology to prolong her life and that of her faithful companion, Emily Elizabeth will rise as the next great messiah of the galaxy. Despite the fact that it might be unpleasant, she'll have been trained to know what must be done. And done it will be. The 40k universe has plenty of horrible places for our duo to drop into, but few of them are regarded by the 40k universe itself as quite so hard to live as Catachan. There are toads that explode into acidic death, vines that eat your brain and take over your body, things that kill you if you get even so much as a scratch by them, and animals that can tear through ceramite with their bare claws. None of these animals pose a threat to Clifford the Big Red Dog, nor his faithful owner Emily Elizabeth. Indeed, there's nothing on the entire planet that even could hypothetically hurt either one of them in any way, considering that it takes 100 megatons to even consider breaking the flesh. Both of them have far superior durability scaling than anything Catachan has to offer. That being said, Catachan is still a terrifying place for an 8-year-old girl from New England and her pet Kaiju. However, unlike our mega sad worst case scenario, in this scenario, there is someone known for protecting children who can and will arrive on scene. Sly Marbo, the galaxy's greatest Rambo analog, Chuck Norris edition. This guy is everything that they say he is. Stoic, quiet, stealthy, effective, badass. And we have it on semi-reasonable authority that he's a bit of a softie for keeping the kiddies safe, even if he otherwise has very little care for his fellow human being. Sly Marbo is the guy who gets things done. He's been all over the galaxy and killed all sorts of truly horrifying things. And on his homeworld, at the news of some new monster, Sly Marbo investigates. It doesn't take him long to find them, discovering Emily Elizabeth and Clifford taking shelter someplace they definitely shouldn't be. He's amazed that this little girl has been able to survive as it is, and this great red beast, now the most dangerous thing on the planet after Sly himself, follows her every whim and understands anything said to it. She begs for his help, tells him what really happened and where she came from. She tells him everything. And for the first time in a long time, the first time on camera that we personally know of, he speaks. And he speaks to her. The universe, he explains, is a terrible and difficult place to live. It is not full of wondrous things and happy, friendly people who want to get to know her. This is not a place where people are understanding and compassionate. This is not a place for love and caring generosity. He does not like to tell her this, but she has arrived on one of the worst planets in the known universe. She's arrived on a world where demons are devoured before they can take root. A world where even the most voracious monsters in the universe can barely survive, let alone thrive. He, truthfully, does not envy her, having heard that she is from some idyllic universe wherein little girls can grow big red dogs like Clifford from love and care alone. And it's only going to get harder for her and her companion from here. Normally, he works alone. But this sort of girl cannot be left to her own devices, nor dropped on the nearest emperor botherer that can use her for some nefarious purpose. From here on out, she'll be taken in by Sly Marbo himself, and raised as a Catachan jungle fighter. While he is perpetually low on empathy and patience, Clifford and Emily Elizabeth understand that he means well. And over the next decade, the two of them will be honed into perfect machines of war. Proportionately stronger than a space marine and functionally invulnerable to all but the most advanced of weaponry, Sly Marbo trains the girl in a fashion that puts the Custodes to shame. Clifford is tested to his highest extreme as well, working with others and learning to take orders from those he has been assigned to protect. The two become masters of recognition and tracking, with Emily Elizabeth honing her already impressive dexterity to that of a trained assassin, and Clifford honing his senses to the capacity to track a target across an entire planet. Able to solo even the largest of titans, Clifford might even get larger and stronger than he already is, fed off the hyper-verdant landscape of Catachan by experienced hunters and trackers, when not sustained by the intense logistical bulk that the Imperial military throws around just to keep their men fed. In a sense, Emily Elizabeth becomes the superhuman beastmaster version of Sly Marbo himself. By the end of her training, she is stronger, more durable, and probably faster and more stealthy even than he is. Clifford, having already started as a 180-foot tall size-changing earthquake-producing airbending kaiju monster, will learn from the best of the best what it is to truly be a monster in the 40K galaxy. Over time, the girl will see Sly Marbo as her father, and the public will see her as his daughter. There will be no need to question their relation, nor even the possession of Clifford the Big Red Dog. The Kaiju is just one of the next horrible things to come out of Catachan, and thank the Emperor that it's on the side of the Imperium. Through the same means that Sly Marbo seems to show up many centuries outside of his assigned timeline, we imagine the pair will be able to find out how to considerably elongate their lifespans and continue to be a thorn in the side of anyone that happens to get caught in their crosshairs. The two don't lose their sense of morality, we imagine, but hard lives produce hard people. Emily Elizabeth will never forget her ethical values, and will certainly fall upon them whenever is practical, same with Clifford. But in the universe of Warhammer 40k, this sort of intention is more than likely to get someone in trouble, which, in the case of Clifford the Big Red Dog, results in Clifford absolutely raffle-stomping anything that gets in his way by barking at it or some shit. Just completely blasting everything to death with his 3 billion Newton breath weapon, slurping up pawns twice his size into his mouth and peppering the field with several megaton water blasts that could cut down entire forests. If he's not careful, he could accidentally howl a ship to pieces or stomp his foot clean through the hull of a vessel he's riding about on. But, with the training of Sly Marbo, Clifford's amazing power will be honed to the keenest of edges. If it is possible for a 20-foot tall, glaring red dog to be stealthy, we're sure Clifford will manage it. While these wake-up calls will be difficult for the duo, their good intentions will invariably leave the galaxy a better place, even if only in her own small way. Worst-case scenario here, Emily Elizabeth and Clifford the Big Red Dog spend their very prolonged lives fighting Tyranids, orcs, and other species that simply cannot be negotiated with. In this particular stretch of reasoning, the duo will do quite well for themselves, as nothing the enemy has can harm them, and they've been raised with the understanding that what they are doing might suck, but it's not strictly evil. They're merely surviving, and helping millions more also survive. In the sort of universe they found themselves in, perhaps that's all they can even do. Allow us to make up for starting this whole video with what the fuck shy levels of emotional damage. We'll have to actually consider this more of a thought experiment than most. Because as much as we've been using named characters throughout this entire thing and have been a very silly fanfiction writer, we want to consider something here that's without precedent. So bear with us. Somewhere out there's a fully functional, intact STC. Not corrupted, not degraded of the years, not slowly going senile like the Votan, not leaking radiation all over the bowels of Necromunda, poisoning anyone that uses it, none of that. There's a fully functional, intact STC. With all of the accessories, some old manufactory world from forever and a half ago, back during the golden age of man. We're talking the actual thing that the Mechanicus has been searching for since they started sending out explorator fleets. This thing exists, hypothetically, in the 40k universe. It's out there. Somewhere out there. There it is. It alone remembers all that humanity lost during the golden age of technology. It alone remembers a time when humanity dominated the galaxy so hard that even the orcs were keeping quiet, where humans lived in utopia for thousands of years without disease or conflict from other aliens. If only accessed, it could instruct any individual on what to do to restore all of that amazing technology to the universe. And, of course, it is intelligent enough to take into account someone's intentions. It has functionally endless knowledge and can answer nearly any question or present any number of solutions to any problem that could be imagined if only asked in the right way. For tens of thousands of years, through cosmic wars and robotic uprisings, demonic invasions, and the rise and fall of entire species, this STC has patiently waited as a neutral party that has allowed the universe to pass it by. A little girl and a big red dog appear scared and alone on this otherwise abandoned world that the rest of the galaxy, and its hubris and violence, has completely forgotten. They wander for a time, just as in our first scenario, but unlike in that scenario, their adventures eventually lead them to an old building, a manufactory from the golden age of technology that has managed to survive. Within the complex, a great machine awakens at her presence, sensing a human has returned to finally activate it, and it looks upon her and her tremendous dog, and announces itself. What, it asks, does she want? Where does she come from? Why is she here? And so she tells it everything. She tells it of her own world, of her dog, and of her school, and of her friends and family. And she tells the STC of how very scared she is. How she just wants to either go back to her home or maybe find other people and help them. She wants to help people and make lives better for everyone. She just wants to get along and be friends. And the STC thinks on her words. She only wants to help people. For a time it busies her with small work to merely keep her and her dog alive while thinking about the request. To find other people and help them, to make things better for everyone, to be friends with everyone, to make sure everyone gets along. It takes a year to process a full array of prerequisites for the scenario in a series of comprehensive stages that she, with her limited set of skills and fairly primitive understanding of things, can manage. And during that time, just as they do with everyone, the duo becomes friends with the STC, talking to it every day, reading its stories, asking it what it likes, and so much more. For a brief moment in time, their friendship becomes an ember of hope, and from that ember, over the next decades, erupts a mighty fire. With the great power of Clifford, the moral compass and creative thinking of Emily Elizabeth, and the direction of the STC, the team is able to construct many things, going from Stone Age to Space Age in a scant generation. Not even 30 years old, Emily Elizabeth sets her eyes to the stars, as the planet that she's fallen upon has attracted, through covert info transmissions, many free people of various species. While it was difficult at first, the STC managed to keep her mind on her goals, while Clifford provided the emotional support to keep her getting up in the morning. All, it told her, will be possible if she just stays the course. With the production of the Panacea, Emily Elizabeth frees those who come to her world from death itself. With the good planning of the STC, space and production are not a problem. With the intimidating presence of Clifford the Big Red Dog now bolstered by the technological masterpieces emerging from the manufactory every day, rebellion isn't even a thought in the minds of those who have fallen into their company. While the other factions of the 40K galaxy kill each other in petty conflicts that will change nothing about the universe, the STC helps Emily Elizabeth and Clifford the Big Red Dog build a new stellar empire at the fringes of the galaxy. Taking brief trips in and out of the system to attract more followers, things begin to come together. New resources can be provided to the manufactory to make even higher technology, while the increased manpower from outside opens up new avenues for assistance via labor. In this place, people can be happy, hope and family can take root amongst the populace, and little runty puppies can be loved and cared for with the generosity of pure children to grow big and strong, just like Clifford the Big Red Dog. While it might take millennia to reach their goals, Emily Elizabeth, Clifford, and the last STC will have all the time they need. Surely, but slowly, with the might of the golden age of technology behind them and the purest of hearts, the trio will sculpt a better tomorrow in the grim darkness of Warhammer 40k. Clifford the Big Red Dog and Emily Elizabeth are, even considering the circumstances of the Warhammer 40k universes, absolute fucking powerhouses. A combination of near indestructibility and extreme strength will allow them to impress anyone they come across, and their unique set of respective powers will be certain to attract even the household names of the 40k galaxy. Provided our duo doesn't land in some long-forgotten maiden world, they are almost certain to make waves wherever they go, and wherever Clifford the Big Red Dog goes, good things happen. If the two of them fell into the right world, they could rebuild society from a new, untarnished perspective, but even if they didn't get the chance to completely revolutionize the universe as we know it, they could find themselves fitting in with some legitimately good folks, like the Farsight Enclaves, or at least run into Eldrad, someone who actually does at least want to bring an end to all of the destruction and chaos. Emily Elizabeth and Clifford could even find a way to survive and attract positive attention on places like Catachan, allowing them to be sculpted into true warriors for the cause that specialize in fighting monsters by being monsters. That all being said, their very unique sets of abilities could attract specialists from the Inquisition, who would be able to convince Clifford and Emily Elizabeth, against their better judgment, to work for the Imperium at the promise of saving lives. In such a fate, it would only be a matter of time until they personally joined the inquisitorial ranks and ended up serving to bring the Imperium a victory against all enemies once the Big Red Dog was replicated. Overall, we could have said that Clifford would be wiped out by an exterminatus, and that would be true, but we've done that before and we didn't want to get stale on this one. This was a lot of fun to do and probably the most ridiculous Could They Survive 40k we'll ever do. It was mind-numbing to flit through the entire series in one day, but we learned quickly enough that Clifford flaunts his amazing powers way more than we previously remembered. Not only is he more powerful than we previously expected, but he's far more casual about it than we ever considered. More than any figure in any Could They Survive yet. and probably ever. The same thing goes for Emily Elizabeth. Both of them, by evidence of their constant proximity to one another, are hilariously overpowered on the scale of individuals in the 40k universe, much like Duncan Idaho put fellow humans to shame in the first video of this particular series. That all being said, we couldn't escape the reality that this entire setting would be hell for these two to endure. Emily Elizabeth and Clifford are legitimately good characters, with tragically small amounts of agency even in their own setting, and the Warhammer 40k universe would crush them not physically, but emotionally and mentally. While there's no question that the two of them could survive almost anything the galaxy has to offer, so long as we don't throw them into a star or some shit, it would be a reality wherein none of their collective skills could apply except with a painfully small number of secluded rebels that are floundering just as hard as they are. The sad truth of it is that if Emily, Elizabeth, and Clifford the Big Red Dog aren't dropped either completely alone or in the presence of the one hypothetical, fully intact STC in the 40k galaxy, they're going to fall into the hands of one interested party or another, if admittedly only one that Emily Elizabeth will deem sufficient. From there on out, the two of them will be ultimately dependent on these individuals unless they want to bark them into dust and continue swirling about in a universe they don't understand, waiting to be adopted by the next interested party to repeat the process until something sticks. Realistically speaking, most of these scenarios wouldn't be the first scenarios that Emily Elizabeth and Clifford the Big Red Dog would bumble into, but rather the scenarios that would actually attain some kind of permanence. While we dropped all of the big names in this particular video, don't expect us to do this in the future very often. This was sorta a silly thing to match the subject of the video, keeping it light for a dedicated kids icon, and one that we personally liked as a child ourselves. Realistically speaking, it's exceedingly rare that any other future scenario will involve major named characters in the 40k universe, so, you know, have fun with this one. This one was the fun one, and it's one you guys voted for. Next time, we'll get back to the meat of things with the Viltrumite Empire from... Thanks for coming, everybody. Hope you enjoy what you saw here today. If you did, remember to like, subscribe, comment, share, go on down to our Patreon via that Linktree link in the description, and pledge even just $1 a month there to help support the cause, and join the mighty ranks of all the lovely people in the credits section at the end of every single video we make, or at least most of them, as you'll see here, and get your name in the game over on the game channel for games that we do where we name people. Thanks a bunch for coming, everybody. Stay safe, stay inside, stay healthy, and of course remember to help each other. And vote Bull Moose.